Hi, my name is Darren Gertis, and I'm a professor who's been providing daily updates on the war in Ukraine. A perennial question that I get is how many dead Russian soldiers are there? And while there's not a definitive answer, I'll show you all the different types of ways that we can answer this, and I'll prove to you that either the Russians are lying or they are horrible at math. So let's start here. About 2 months ago, I provided an explainer on how many dead Russians in Ukraine, and I provided a report, and I actually showed you all the basics of how we are trying to triangulate on that question. Here, this is from the Ukrainians. It's the Defense Department of Ukraine. They're saying that 80,000 eliminated personnel, and if we mean that they're killed, which I believe that's what it means, 80,000 killed Russians, it sounds like a high number compared to other estimates, but I'll show you the other estimates along the way so that you can make up your own mind. So stay with me all the way to the end. I'll show you a spreadsheet where I calculate everything, okay? All right, so just a couple days ago, and we almost lost sight of this because of the amazing results in Kherson over the last couple of days, but America's top general said that more than 100,000 Russian troops were killed or injured in Ukraine. This is General Mark Miley, and he said 40,000 Ukrainian civilians and well over 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in the war. But he also said same thing probably on the Ukrainian side. Now he's being tight-lipped about the numbers. I'm sure he has better figures than that, and I don't know that that's really, I wouldn't hang my hat on 100,000. It's more than that, but we don't know exactly what that is. So if you go to Wikipedia and you look up 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, you'll see this. And in that article, you'll see confirmed casualties and estimated casualties. Confirmed casualties are going to be inherently low because we haven't counted all of them. So only a small percentage. So let's look at estimated casualties breakdown and who the source is. The source, the Ukrainian government looking at civilians, and the Ukrainian government or Russian or US estimate looking at killed. So how many Ukrainian forces have been estimated killed or wounded? Well, the Russian government is saying 61,000 killed and 49,000 wounded. That's a Russian government source. The US government is saying that there's probably 100,000 or more killed or wounded. They were also saying, the US government is also estimating the same for Russian, and the Ukrainian government is estimating 80,000 killed. Now with 80,000 killed, there's usually a multiple of 2 to 3 times wounded as well. So that would be an enormous figure if that was actually true. But we don't know. So let's look at just a couple days ago. There was this article that I went over in a previous video, Russia to pull out troops of Kherson. Okay, according to Circovin, Kyiv's troops suffered heavy losses amounting to over 12,000 soldiers in October. Russian casualties were 7 to 8 times lower. Okay, now let's say that we could believe what the Russians were saying here. If we could, we would say that 12,000 in 1 month, that means 400 soldiers per day are killed, okay? Or lost. I mean, we don't know if it's killed or wounded. They just suffered heavy losses amounting to 12,000. But let's say that's 4,000 or 400, and they usually are talking in terms of killed, not killed and wounded. But let's just say 400 a day. That would mean times 260, it's day 262. So times 260, I'm using a rough cut in math, that's 104,000 casualties killed over the course of the war, which I'm sure Russia would claim, which means by a multiple of 2.5, and we're multiplying by 2.5 here because there's a multiple of 2 to 3 for wounded. So that would mean that Russia would be claiming 364,000 Ukrainian casualties, which sounds mind-numbingly high. But at the same time, they're also saying this. They're also saying that the Russian casualties were 7 to 8 times lower. So the math of that would be that there was only 53 Russian casualties, Russians killed per day, right? And then that would also mean that there is 53 times 260 is 13,000 total killed Russians, and then that would mean that there's killed and wounded, a total of only 48,000 Russian killed or casualties in comparison to 364,000 Ukrainian killed and wounded combined, and that just seems improbable, to say the least. Okay, so is Mark Miley right? Are the Ukrainians right? Who's right? So I set up a spreadsheet when I did this last, and this was Russian casualties per day, Russian casualties in Ukraine. So I have updated now because I did it after I did the last video. You can go back and watch the last video. It's also very interesting. So the American estimate in August was 20,000 killed. Now, with a wounded multiple. Now, I've updated 20,000 killed in early August, like the very beginning of August, would have been roughly 4,000 per month. And I'm using a very rough cut, okay? So please bear with me with that. This is before the surge in Kharkiv. This is before the Kherson counterattack. Again, it's a rough cut. 20,000, and then adjusted since the last estimate, there should be at least 34,000 killed. I can say, I would bet money that there are at least 34,000. I would even go higher than that, but I'm being conservative here. At least 34,000 Russians dead from the Ukraine war. Okay, the multiple is 2.5 for killed to wounded, so that's just a general rule of thumb in war. So that would mean 119,000 total casualties. Mark Miley said 100,000. Okay, that's probably within the range of where we could be. That would mean 131 killed per day and 458 killed and wounded total casualties per day since the war began. I think that's a fair understanding. It's probably higher, but as a conservative understanding, it's I think fair. The British were a little higher, 25, 37. If we adjust, that would mean wounded multiple of 93 and total casualties 131. Pretty similar. Ukrainian estimate at this point in August was 54,000 killed. It is now 80,000 killed, and they might know things that I don't know. I'm not privy to everything, so I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying I don't know. Their estimate would then have a wounded multiple of 200,000, which would mean 280,000 total casualties, which to my mind sounds high. I would hope that it's higher than the current, the 119 or 131 that the Americans and British have, but 280,000 sound very high. Now, one way of understanding this is that they may be including not just Russians that are killed, but fighters for the the Donetsk People's Republic, or the LPR, or the Wagner Group, or any other people fighting on that side. And that could legitimately inflate some of these numbers, but that would be nearly double, or more than double, what these two estimates are. Now, the Russians, they had an interesting document in September. I think it was about September 11th or so, that they had a document where they were paying out death payments or something along these lines. Dennis Davidoff talked about it. I'm not sure of its veracity, but I don't know that it's been disproven. And at that time, they said that there was roughly 48,000 that had been killed. That was at a time when the Americans were saying roughly 20,000. So if this is true, then this number of total casualties is probably higher, probably by a good bit, probably nearly double. I mean, could be nearly double, which is actually nearly double would be the Ukrainian estimate. So, okay, so 48,000, if you extrapolate that 48,000 a couple months further, it would be 68,000, 170 is multiple of wounded, and that would be 238,000 total casualties, which is not exactly what the Ukrainians would be, but it's in the neighborhood. So that's really interesting. But what's really, really interesting is how the Russians do their math, because the official Russian estimate in September of their own casualties was only 5,000, when the Americans were saying, no, it's 20,000. The Brits were saying it's 25, and the Ukrainians were saying, no, it's more like 50,000. Okay, they were saying it's only 5,000. But at the same time that they were saying that, they were saying the Ukrainian casualties were 61,000. That's a multiple of about 10. So it's not really probable, given the way that the Russians have fought, and fought very badly, not working combined arms effectively together. I don't think that that's probably the case, but it's more bravado and bragging. And remember, this is Russian state media. This is coming from RT, where we're seeing this, that it's amounting to over 12,000, and the Russian casualties were 7 to 8 times lower. So I think what we know here from this is that we don't know what the actual estimate is. It's all based on certain assumptions, and It's probable that there are high casualties on both sides, but it's even more probable that there's higher casualties on the Russian side from everything that we understand. And it's also almost proven that the Russians are liars or they're really, really bad at math. But I think the Russians are lying. So, okay, I hope that helps you. If you like this, go back and see the earlier one where I talk about the document, because a lot hinges on whether this Russian finance ministry document is true. And if it is, then this gives a lot of credence to this figure of 238,000 rather than, well, not exactly the 2028 or 280,000 that the Ukrainians are claiming, but it's really close. It's a lot closer than the American estimate, which is probably somewhere north of 120,000 or something along those lines. So please watch that video now, and thank you for caring about Ukraine.